very, very unhelpful when politicians, indeed any public figures, make ill-considered statements that could be taken by others as provocation to demonstrate violently. Occasionally, and I've seen it happen many times over my career, politicians who mean well simply do end up saying things that can be interpreted as provocation. That's very, very unfortunate.
Joining me now is Stephen Roberts, the former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Welcome to you. How do you feel that the police are handling these protests so far? There have been some pretty nasty incidents, haven't there?
There have been some pretty nasty incidents, but I think the police are doing a pretty good job at the moment in pretty awful circumstances. Wearing that sort of riot gear in the sort of heat that we're having at the moment is deeply uncomfortable, particularly when people are throwing rocks at you. But so far, so good, I think. We haven't had, thankfully, any really serious injuries on either side. And that is one of the objectives of any public order policing situation, to try and make sure that nobody gets hurt badly at the end of it. And so far, touching wood, that's been achieved.
What are the circumstances in which arrests are made? What do you have to do on a protest if people are throwing missiles around? How do the police decide who they're actually going to arrest?
Well, evidence, of course, is a prime consideration. But in a public order situation, you have to be very careful to make sure that you don't make the situation worse by precipitate action, if you like, wading into the crowd to arrest a particular person, if that's likely to cause more disorder. Far better to photograph, to gather the evidence, and then when things have calmed down, to go around and arrest that person later. It's always a difficult judgment to make. There will be occasions where it's absolutely essential to wade into a crowd and to take somebody out who, if they're really causing a major problem. But it's something that always has to be considered and decided on calmly, rather than just a knee-jerk reaction.
If there is, and protests normally have a political content, that must sometimes be quite difficult for police officers who may have their own personal views one way or another.
When you put on a uniform, you take off any political views that you have. That's part and parcel of occupying the office of constable. It really is that simple. In my career, I marched beside Trotskyists, Marxists, and National Front people, and in all cases, tried to make sure that they could have a peaceful demonstration and that anybody opposing them didn't interfere with them. Whatever my views, they are irrelevant to how it's policed.
How do you feel about the use of the internet and the clear organisation that's gone on some internet platforms, and also very prominent people with a lot of followers like Nigel Farage at least giving credence to some of the arguments that are being made? Can the law deal with that?
It's very, very unhelpful when politicians, indeed any public figures, make ill-considered statements that could be taken by others as provocation to demonstrate violently. Occasionally, and I've seen it happen many times over my career, politicians who mean well simply do end up saying things that can be interpreted as provocation. That's very, very unfortunate. The internet's a bit of a double-edged sword in that if you want to have a successful demonstration, you have to advertise. And advertising on the internet is quite public. So the police service monitors social media very closely in connection with situations like this, simply to gather intelligence about who is pushing forward a demonstration, the sort of numbers of people that are responding to it. That's key information for the police service in order to prepare the operational response. In other words, what are we going to do about it? So it would be better if the internet was not a forum for spreading misinformation, but the benefits are definitely there in operational terms.
Steve Roberts, thank you very much indeed. So that's how the police have to prepare to deal with more violence. Let's look now at who is taking part in this disorder. The Times investigations editor Dominic Kennedy has written in the Times today about how those far-right groups operate, and he joins me now. Welcome to you.
Hello.
Very, very extensive piece of work in the Times today. Who are these people?
Well, they are now a new group of people. In the past, the far right in Britain was organised through groups such as political parties like the National Front, British National Party, or street movements like the English Defence League. But now what you're getting is what's called by experts the post-organisational far right, or the network far right. And what they are largely individuals who are making provocative calls to come along to demonstrations, knowing that that is likely to kick off. There is a second group involved, and they are the ideological people, such as Patriotic Alternative, which is an organisation that has been spotted in Southport. And what they'll do is that because they're an organisation, they're very careful not to actually call for violence. So they will wind people up to be very angry about an issue, wait for the riot to happen, and then come in and say, well, the police are terrible, they're picking on the white working class, you can't do anything in this country anymore. So they profit from the riots. And then the actual rioters themselves may well just be local racists who are complete amateurs, turn up in civvies, their faces showing on videos, and they're going to get caught by the police.
But to what extent is this spontaneous, if you like, and to what extent is it really just being whipped up in a calculated sort of way by this network?
Well, these protests, not obviously as violent as this, but these kind of protests on these issues have been going on since lockdown in a kind of an underground manner that people aren't largely noticing. But there are many protests organised regularly outside asylum seeker hotels. Similarly, libraries which are having drag queen story hours, towns where there's a proposal to introduce traffic regulations which are called 15-minute cities by conspiracy theorists. So there is already an underground movement of people who overlap and that they are available to go to an event.
And where do well-known figures like so-called Tommy Robinson or indeed Nigel Farage, where do they fit into this?
Tommy Robinson is extremely influential and very important. And he's used to be the leader of the English Defence League, which was basically a punch-up looking for somewhere to happen. And that would go around the country organising demos and riots and so on. He left that. He's now an online operator on his own. He's on X. He has 800,000 followers. And he's saying things like, the police are picking on British people who just want to look after our children and nobody is safe anymore. Writing is the only language that people understand these days. On the demo in London, which descended into a riot, people were chanting his name. They were wearing his name on T-shirts. He is a crucial figure, and he does very much rely on being on X.
But he's not turning out at these demos at the moment.
He's currently missing. He's got a sidekick called Danny Tomo, who may turn up, but Tom Robinson isn't turning up at the moment.
And what connection, if any, to these incidents is there to Nigel Farage?
I think it's fair to say that Nigel Farage is not organising or involved in this kind of activity. His comments are obviously irresponsible, but they shouldn't be seen as being part of the same violent activity that's going on in the streets, which is being organised by networks that do exist.
Now, should any of this organisation, should it or can it be subject to legal intervention?
Yeah, well, the police are monitoring these people all the time, and the counter-terrorism and the counter-extremism police do a very patient job of waiting for these people to slip up. They're clever, the operatives. They will they will stop short of breaking speech laws or incitement laws, which they are often advised about by lawyers who are sympathetic, and the police will therefore have to wait for them to do something that is foolish, and then they can pounce and get a conviction. But Patriotic Alternative, which is now one of the most significant far-right movements, and that is a group, that has had 2 of its operatives jailed, one last year for a terror-related offence, and one this year for incitement of racial hatred. And the police have made clear this is an ongoing operation. So they are monitoring these people very closely, and they will pounce.
But presumably you can't monitor encrypted message services.
Well, I don't think that the police are only looking online and on social media. I think they have other ways of getting information as well. So that they will have, they'll be monitoring people, raiding houses, getting information possibly from informers. So I wouldn't think that I wouldn't think that the use of encrypted services is going to get you away with stuff.
Now, 90% of normal people in Whitehall protests were normal, 10% were idiots. I mean, what's your feeling? I mean, how big is this movement, these number of people out there who seem prepared to go along and confront the police and have violent protests, and obviously are trying to intimidate people in hostels or in, Muslim people or whatever?
Yeah, I think the actual hardcore of people who are going to start violence against the police and such extreme activity is pretty small. But you can rally people to be angry, whether they are football hooligan types or upset families or just racists in local areas, so that they can act as agents provocateurs for the local people who normally would never dream of doing such a thing.
Dominic Kennedy, thank you very much.